Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is another panel for the Indie Game Designers Network Summer Series that is being produced for people at Gen Con this year, 2024. My name is Steve D. I'll be the moderator for this panel, which is called Toys and Games, or Toys as Games, depending on who you talk to. And we'll be asking the question about where toys and games overlap. With me today, we have Stephanie Bryant, Sean Jaffe, and Mike Ashkewe. And Sean's looking at me like I may have just mispronounced his name.
A little bit.
Jaffe?
Don't worry about it, Jaffe. Yeah.
Okay. I'm in Australia, and these lovely Americans are then going to quickly introduce themselves, and we will start with you, Mike. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so my name is Mike Ashkewe, otherwise known as O'Daisy Bing, which in Indigenous Canadian Ojibwe translates to Heart of the River. I have been a content creator online since 2007 with the podcast This Week in Geek, and I am a freelance writer on Star Trek Adventures by Modifius. My interest in the toy space is I've been reviewing toys since about 2007. I am a ridiculous toy dork specializing in Transformers, G.I. Joe, Marvel Legends, Star Wars Black Series, and pretty much anything 80s based I'm probably into. And I enjoy a good old-fashioned role-playing game.
Fantastic. Yeah, so the rest of you also, yeah, tell us about your favorite toys and toy lines in your intro as well. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Bryant. I am the author of Threadbare, which is a game in which you play a toy. I don't know if you can see that. I am also a member of the IGDN, which is hosting this recording. I have contributed to a couple dozen other game projects, usually as adventures or supplements, including the adventure Can't Sleep, Clowns Will Eat Me, which is part of the Any Winning collection, the Trilemma Adventures. It was in 2020. It won the silver. And I've published a couple of zines. Basically, whenever I feel like being creative in games, I throw something out there and see what happens with it. Let's see what else. And for my day job, I'm an agile coach and consultant.
Fantastic.
Oh,
And Sean?
favorite toy?
Oh, yep. Or toy line. What's the most passionate one for you?
So, as an adult, my interest in toys is a little different than what I played with when I was a kid. So I'm going to say that when I was a kid, it was all about Barbie. My sister and I had something like 32 Barbies when we were done, growing up and playing with them. We had a 3-story Barbie house that was taller than either of us. And in fact, I think is still taller than us because we're both pretty short. With working lights, and it kind of had a reminiscent look to the house that we grew up in. So it was kind of our special Barbie dream house.
Fantastic. Sean.
I am RM Sean B. Jaffe, or at least that's how I'm building stuff. I did Rememorex with Nerdy City with my wife Megan, and it's a game about kids in the 80s, and so we sort of delved into 80s pop culture, which took us into Commandroids here. Where you kind of also, well, I mean, you're not actually a toy. You're an actual giant transforming robot. But we wanted to like bring together, the mythology of the 80s. So we started with giant transforming robots, and it's like everything from Robotech to Voltron to obviously the Transformers and the GoBots. And this Tuesday, so in just 2 days, we're going to be doing a Kickstarter for Holomatics, which is the next one in that series, which is going to be Barbie and the Rockers and Gem and the Holograms, and that's Megan's baby. So yeah, the sphere of toys and role playing games overlapping is really where I have completely planted my flag at this point.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about how those two things overlap, because obviously toys are really strongly imagination tools. You know, that's what we tend to use them as kids. We are playing out stories. We often pick a character and make them interact. So it seems like a very natural fit that they would overlap with role-playing games. All of you are working in the RPG field. Is there anything? Do you think that's just such a natural fit that the two always sort of go together, or is there something that separates the two between a role-playing game and a toy? And obviously the physicality, but um, do you see them as just almost natural connections, or is there something fundamental that separates a toy from a role-playing game?
I think there's something interesting where toys are maybe, or role playing games are maybe a bit of an untapped market for toys, because you see some incredibly interesting stuff come out of the space. I know me and Sean were talking before we got on air here how we're starting to see Dungeons and Dragons toys come back out in, like, we've got NECA holds the license, Hasbro does stuff, Jack Specific, Transformers has their own role-playing game via Modifius, and or not Modifius, Renegade Game Studios, which
Yep.
is wonderfully supported. I mean, the thing that got me interested in BattleTech, which is a role-playing game, is there were toys in the 1990s by Tycho, I think it was.
Oh,
Tony
yeah.
yeah.
I remember that. It was like it was a weird offshoot of the Exo Squad line where they got into like doing BattleTech, and um it was like, well, they were trying to figure out what to do with Exo Squad, which was a great toy line, like one of the best of the 90s. And like um it was an interesting like little side project that I don't know how that worked out for. I guess it, we're remembering it, so couldn't have been that bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the crossover, I mean, I had this realization, and the realization that kind of led me into like doing Commandroids Whole Cloth, like a short version of the history of Nerdy City. We started as a company doing LARPs. We did LARPs in the area. We did the big one that we're famous for is we did a Pacific Rim LARP that was set in this hotel, and like it was supposed to be the Shatter Dome, and then we had like cameras, and there were people in giant robot costumes and monster costumes. It was a whole thing. Anyway,
Cool.
it was really fun. But then LARP was a very like oversaturated market in this area. And around 2016, I saw this video online called Memorex by a editing team called Smash TV, and it was just pure unadulterated black tar nostalgia. Um, if you were alive in the 80s and 90s, check out anything by it's all on YouTube. Memorex, Skinemax. It's not like a porn thing, it's just because that's the name that people gave for Cinemax at the time. And uh Gunslinger, they've just got like these sort of visual tone poems that'll take you right back there. So that inspired me to do Remember X the game. And uh we just happened to be right place, right time. So we did this game about, kids in the 80s versus like weird government conspiracies and dangerous aliens. And we did that in 2016, and then Netflix just kind of blew that up. So it was right place, right time. Uh, and then from there, we just decided to lean into it. And I was thinking about like, where do we go with this world? And I realized I've been doing this my whole life, right? I would take out, the Transformers, and my brother's favorite Transformer was Jetfire. So he was always the main character. Jetfire would have these adventures. Then I would have like, Jetfire is going to get attacked by Sharktacons today. And I realized I'm just running a role playing game for the kid. Like it was me and my little brother. And like, that was what I was doing. So like, I'm like, well, let's just keep it going. We've got more rules to make it a little bit more cohesive, and we'll work with that. And that's where this grew out of. So yeah, I think that there is an innate connection that is worth tapping into there.
Steph.
So for me, I think I've been playing role-playing games since I was 4. So the connection between play make-believe and play make-believe with dice was there wasn't a very thick line between those two for me when I was growing up. And but there was, when I got older and started GMing and started doing my own thing with it, I didn't incorporate toys into RPGs for a long time. The most I would do is, if I needed a box of minis, I'd go to the dollar store and pick up, a plastic tube of random monsters or people or whatever. But for the most part, I didn't really try to blend those until much later. But what I have found now that I do blend toys into role-playing games a lot more, is that role-playing games, you can play a role-playing game without any physicality, without anything tactile. I mean, we've been playing online for now, well, over 10 years. Okay. My friends and I have been playing together for over 10 years online. Some of them I had not met until last year, right? And that's fine. It's a great experience. All of the things that go into an RPG are there. Our imagination is there. Our problem solving, our teamwork, all of that is there. But when I go to a convention or play in person and I have the opportunity to bring an actual toy out, something happens to people. There is a connection that comes out that is different and kind of electric. And I'll give a really good example of this, which is my friend Tamara Gorantz is a games on demand organizer in the Los Angeles area. And when he goes to conventions, and also when he does this at like the game days that they put on down there, he will facilitate the quiet year.
Mhm.
And instead of drawing on the map, he has people take Lego and they have 30 seconds to put together something in Lego that represents whatever it is that they're supposed to add to that map. And
That's genius.
It does
That's
a
cool.
bunch of things for people. One, it makes them extremely interested in what they're doing. They're suddenly they're like picking out a couple pieces and doing it very fast because 30 seconds, right? They stop caring about whether or not it looks good or right or perfect or realistic because they're not drawing it. They're using blocks, right? And when the map fills out, you have what looks like a little city because all these little blocks that represent the buildings are now 3-dimensional, and you have that 3-dimensional sense of this community that is being represented in the quiet year. So I think that is one of the best blends of a toy into a game, or a game using a toy, that I've seen that isn't overt, deliberate, like my game, it's deliberate, it's overt. Like if you bring your toy with you to the game and you say this is Dora the Exploder, then you get a reroll that session, right? Like there's a mechanical reason to do it. But if I didn't have that mechanical thing in there, I would hope that somebody would say, yeah, I'm going to make Dora, or I'm going to make the thing that I've visualized and, created for this game, much like people will do their fan art for their D&D characters. They'll, it used to be that you would cosplay your D&D character at cons.
Yep.
I know the cosplay world has moved on. Everyone just does something from anime or an established media. But I loved seeing, someone's, I guess they're called OC now, like their original character that they were caring about and playing in their RPG. It's like it's fantastic.
Something about that seems so magical. Like I would wish I was around to see people cosplay as their D&D characters. Like that seems like that's a level of immersion I can only dream of.
Well, it's
And
just LARP, right? I mean,
yeah, I I I've done LARPing, but it was always vampire, so it was always a like asshole emo kid in black. But
right.
but I just had a thought when you guys were like kind of talking about bringing toys to the table and it brings something different. One game I think that really lends itself to toyification and role-playing games, and it's a minis game, but I see this magic in people's eyes when you look at people who play BattleTech, when they really paint their minis or when they paint their specific unit and they bring that out. Like I've seen people who 3D print stuff on Thingiverse and they're able to completely customize their mech, and sometimes they will scale it up from the little mini that sits on the hex map to something that's 6 inches, something that looks like it would be produced by a Hasbro or a Playmates or a Jack specific. You get to see some astounding work, and I'm honestly surprised more role-playing games don't license their stuff out. Like for example, we were just talking about D&D there. Like
Not for lack of trying.
like
Yeah.
think about a company like Catalyst Game Labs, if they were to produce figures for Shadowrun, think about
Yeah.
how cool that could be, or even Cyberpunk.
They did. There were
They-
Shadowrun action figures.
Really?
That happened. I don't know if the time was right. That was probably late 90s, but they did try and do it.
Oh,
And they were like trying to do like that kind of like McFarlane, like kind of, they're more of a like highly detailed statue with like 1 or 2 points of articulation. But there definitely was a Shadowrun action. But I think here's the problem that people have run into with trying to do specifically action figure lines based on role-playing games, and I think there is a solution that I'm seeing happen in real time. The problem is that like, and this is the same thing that happened when like World of Warcraft was trying to do an action figure line forever, right? And it was a huge property. Like, 2006, you couldn't throw a rock without hitting World of Warcraft somewhere. So obviously the next move would be to do an action figure line, but like none of them really quite hit because nobody wants an action figure of J random NPC as much as they want an action figure of their own character. So what they did was made these like highly generic, like, oh, this is a male orc shaman, and this is a female undead. And this is actually for both Shadowrun and Warcraft. They did like this is a female elven hacker. This is a male orcish warrior, right? And yeah, okay, like even if I am playing a male orcish warrior, this isn't my male orcish warrior. The solution is actually weirdly something that like directly ties into what the IDGN is doing. Because in my experiences going, especially to TFCon, right, I got to see firsthand how
That's
this.
Transformer Con. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a like.
Just TF. What
Yeah,
does it stand?
TF is Transformer, but like
Yep.
it's the fact that it is not specifically translated, it's TFCon is important because it's not Hasbro.
Yeah.
And that is, I guess, sort of ties into what I'm saying here. So this guy here is not Hasbro. This lady is neither of these, despite like the look and the tooling and all of that. They are not Hasbro. They are not Transformers. They're third party. And there is this weird thing happening with like an indie revolution happening in toys. So there's a company called Four Horsemen, and here's one of their figures. This guy is made to look like Stratos from Masters of the Universe, but he's not. And Four Horsemen is like just a few guys in Jersey that kind of put this stuff out, but they've got an entire toy line of these. And what they do is they do like these very, very high end figures that are very, very well made, but have all a very minimal like footprint and mythology to them, and you can mix and match the parts to make your own character. And so I think that's a big part of the success of that line, which is called Mythic Legions. Is I think that a lot of people pick up the Mythic Legions line because it's very easy to sort of swap out the parts and be like, okay, I've got this basic elf and I can use her, and I give her a staff and I give her a book, and now she is my druid, or I give her a sword and a shield and now she is my paladin or whatever. And that idea of moving away from the highly branded specifics, towards the more open-ended action figure, I think is doing some weird and interesting good things for indie toy designers, which is kind of cool.
Sean, when you mentioned, people want to have their action figure of their character, I think that you hit on something there with, like Hero Forge, where you can customize your miniature pretty much
Definitely.
endlessly, right? And
I
the
have multiple
popularity of
players
that.
who just send me those as their character
Yeah.
drawing. Yeah.
Same.
I think everybody does.
Yeah, Hero Forge is great. But I want to talk about that because I think you've hit on a really interesting thing. First of all, the idea that there is an indie toy market, that's really interesting. I imagine that that's mostly aimed at adult toy collectors, though, because it seems like, for most of the things that we're talking about here, we're talking about things that are dominated by merchandising giants, because the toy industry, the toy market, is one of the largest in the world, and it's therefore dominated by these very, very wealthy companies that produce these expensive toy lines. It's interesting that there is an indie sort of toy thing rising, but how do we negotiate that tension between this is a massive mass market, highly produced, highly targeted thing, but we also use it for imagination? How do we and role-playing games are so indie and in-house and creative. Is that causing a tension? Does that make them seem, fighting against each other? Steph, do you want to start with that?
I can try.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. Yeah. I think one of the things that we don't really talk a whole lot about is the barrier to entry for those indie toy makers.
Yep.
It is illegal in the United States to sell a toy branded and marketed at children under the age of, I think, 8 without going through an extremely expensive process to verify that your toys are safe, which is a great thing, by the way, because making toys that are safe for children is important, and not, marketing toys that are going to harm kids to children is also important. But it means that if you are making a game that uses a toy, or a toy as part of a game, or just a toy in general, and you want it to be accessible to that young crowd, and something that their parents would buy and everything for them and so forth, you have to have deep pockets.
Yep.
And I've backed a number of Kickstarters that are like, oh, we're gonna make a plushie for this thing, and if they don't address that at the beginning, I know that project's going to be late, or it might fail.
There's been a number of channels on YouTube that I watch about the indie toy space. There's one I'm a huge fan of called Retro Blasting, and Michael over there does exceptional research. And I've learned a lot about, because like he's said, the fans do the best work, but there are certain projects that fail for one reason or another. I know there was a 1/8 scale Airwolf project that just recently imploded, which looked amazing and astounding, but now people are out that money because the guy just couldn't afford to do it for whatever reason. I know there's a video over on the Retro Blessing channel that like kind of talks about it, but you're right. There's this huge barrier to entry, and there's always that risk things could happen, which is really unfortunate. And like for every success story where you get where they produce the last 17 Star Wars figures, or you produce something really awesome, you get so many failed Kickstarters and broken promises. You think about the Kickstarter issues years ago with Robotech Tactics. Think how long that took to get kind of sorted out. I got lucky and I got mine pretty quickly, but I figured that's because I was in the media, so I was kind of shielded from that. But I know other people had problems for a really, really long time. Let me tell you, an interesting read, go read that Kickstarter comment page.
Just
I don't need that
aside,
kind of negativity in my life.
Don't read the comments.
Don't read the comments.
It's actually 13. Like if you make anything that is labeled that isn't labeled 13 plus in Australia,
Yeah.
it has to go through a lot of rigorous safety testing. So pretty much anyone who's making a game here has 13 plus on their products, and a lot of our products that come in from overseas are labeled 13 plus. So we have a huge divide at that age, and it certainly is a big factor. And it means, again, yes, that anything made for young people by Australians or that is sold to Australians tends to only come from the mass market. And that means, on that subject, just following on from that, is that a lot of the things we get, particularly in games, are very poorly designed because they're mass marketed. And that causes an ongoing thing where people assume that they're going to be cheap and not very good. So that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's something that I think, again, we have a tension. Anyone want to jump in on that tension between?
I can sort of address this because
Yeah.
it's something that I think about a lot, because it's kind of where most of my work lies is in this idea of like mass market. And like this you're right. Toys, the indie toy revolution is not for kids. Because of that kind of regulation, it really can't be, because 3D printed stuff just can't be robust enough that a child can like potentially smash it or not swallow it, whatever.
Yeah.
I've got a nephew who's 3, and I constantly find stuff. I'm like, I want to give this to, nope, I can't do that. He's gonna eat it or break it or whatever. So it's interesting because the toys aren't sold to kids as much as they used to be. And I mean, that's not really a revelation right now, right? It's like kids are spending more time on the phones and on tablets, and I'm watching this 3-year-old like go up to analog devices and try and swipe stuff.
Yep.
So there is certainly like a thing that we are not going to be prepared for with when that generation comes to like the death of analog is going to hit us hard, and it's not over yet. That said, weighing it against my own experience, right, was as an American kid in the 80s, I was introduced to this paradise of intellectual properties being said to me right and left because of a frankly cynical and horrible capitalist deregulation that was brought about by like our monstrous administration at the time. And there's some good that came of that in the long term, but none of it, I think, was intentional. I think it was all in terms of it was all done obviously in the idea of short-sighted profits. Nobody thought that they were going to, accidentally make the greatest war movie of that generation or something and have it be about giant robots. So I think that this is something where, you'll see like that becoming more of a teenage thing again. And these indie games and indie toys, kids start to like an aspirational thing. When you're older, You know, you might you might be able to play with these like really cool things that you can't necessarily touch yet. And so that kind of, I think, brings the pendulum back in a weird way. Um, mass market stuff, I mean, with regards to like toys and games that are made for small children, um, some of it is good, some of it is bad. Mass market isn't necessarily always bad. It isn't necessarily always good. I think it's just sort of, it's mass market. It's what everybody's going to get. And so it's something where, like, if you spend any time in the toy aisle, the stuff that's marketed towards the littlest kids, the two things that I've noticed, and this has very little to do with games, but it's kind of an interesting thing, are they're very much based on app-based video games.
Like
You know, so
Fortnite, right?
yeah, well, even like past Fortnite, there's like Roblox and stuff, like, and stuff that like I've never heard of, like Piggy. I don't know what that is, but it has a robust action figure line for some reason. Um, and then the other one is toys that place a heavy emphasis on the unboxing, but the toy almost seems to be incidental afterwards. Um, and that's again a sort of heavy pivot away from the story-based play patterns that I remember being introduced to, starting with Star Wars. Here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, they fight, the good guys win, end of game. But like in this case, the toy is literally like, you pull apart this box and then you pull apart this other box, and then there's a bag of slime and you pull the pieces out and you assemble the thing, and now you've got a toy. And the thing that I think is kind of cool is you don't know who that guy is. You've made this toy, but it doesn't have a name. And that kind of brings you back to this idea of character creation. Because, I know that this guy here is Soundwave. I know that he's a Decepticon. I know that he works for Megatron. I used to try to like play with some, and like, it's hard to get that out of your head. You can't, and that was why I always loved getting like these weird toys from Japan where I didn't have any name for. I would be like, I'm gonna decide who the hell this guy is. And these unboxing toys kind of give kids that chance again. So it's weird. I'm typically a very hopeless, cynical guy when it comes to the future, but this is the one thing where I'm like, this might be cool. There might be a cool future here.
There was something that I go through the toy aisles, and I think back to my kind of childhood. We were speaking about mass market and cheaply made toys, and I wonder how some of those toys never became role-playing games. Think about when we were younger. Think about how ridiculously huge at one time the Pokemon franchise was, right? How did someone never license that into a role-playing game? Because even the little toys you got at Burger King, when those came in, those Burger King kids meals, is that not the perfect size for a mini to bring to your table to say, hi, I have Sandshrew, Mr. Mime, and Pikachu, and it just works? Yes, there's still Pokemon toys in the aisles, but they're perfectly scaled for a role-playing game, and no company has ever stepped up to the plate to license that. And yet I remember very specifically, speaking of toys, this was baked right into the game. Artel Saurian in the 90s, when they did the Dragon Ball Z role-playing game, they specifically say, if you bring your figure of Krillin or Broly or whatever, you can use that to simulate distance. They actually built toys into that. And that's one of the few examples I can remember being hard written into the rules. Like they openly say you're going to need a larger table. But I remember certain toys are ripe for RPGification, if that's a phrase. Like, why have we never seen Halo as a thing? Because that's a huge property that has tons of action figures, but the
I think
property
there
has
is a
never
Halo
expanded.
RPG that came out like a couple years back. There's like one of these like Free League or somebody like that is doing like just they've been snapping up
Not
properties
that
right and left.
not that I'm aware of, but there
I
is
think the reason that Pokemon never had a role-playing game is Pokemon isn't. I mean, I think
Okay.
that it potentially lends itself to that, but like,
Okay, I hate to will actually, you guys.
hit me,
But
hit me.
Pokemon
Go,
does
go.
have a tabletop role-playing game.
It
official.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's from
it's
Mantic.
Pokemon Tabletop Adventures,
Pokemon,
Pokemon
sorry.
Tabletop United, and there's a 5e hack.
Huh.
Right.
Oh,
Um,
that's awesome. Please share
So,
later.
and that was that released by Hasbro?
they
Um,
were, you know, actual like licensed, right?
Oh, wow.
Um,
I had no
I
idea it
think
was
that like one of
licensed.
the things with like video games and why, and this is something to take into account, right? Like this is
Mhm.
something that I think where D&D really tripped over its feet once again with World of Warcraft when they did 4E and it was kind of trying to be World of Warcraft. Whenever you do a role-playing game or war game or some sort of analog game based off of a video game, you have to give a good reason for that to exist because otherwise you're just playing the video game but slower,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? And like that, and that is not going to work.
Right.
So, and I think that's what happened to, that version of fourth edition was just let's play World of Warcraft but slower. Why would you do that? Like it's
I mean,
so yeah,
I
those
have
sort of
reasons why I did, and don't play World of Warcraft, and they mostly have to do with not being able to play MUDs or MMOs, because they're too addicting. But
well,
anyway,
no, I think this is actually a really good point of inflection because what we've sort of run up to here is that one of the reasons these RPGs aren't really marketed is that is it possible that the kids who are the biggest consumers don't need them because they're already playing role-playing games, and we've sort of made this mistake of going, well, therefore, like we then have to make them more of a capital G game to sort of sell to teenagers because they need some sort of structure or thing, a reason to put aside the toys. Do you think there's a way that we can sort of make a role-playing game that is giving the kids what they want, given that they can just play with the toys? Is there a place in there? Or and is there something intrinsic to games that at a point where you get to 10, 11, 12, where you go, I need a game capital G to sort of work against
so
as
this actually hits
okay.
on something that philosophically, especially when I'm doing game design, is really key to like my design for games and things is children do not need rules for playing make believe. They don't need help learning how to play make believe. They don't need a rule book for it. They don't need supplements. They don't need anything that you could sell them to play make believe. Role playing games are make believe with extra steps. They are for people who have forgotten how to play make believe.
Right.
And I know we're like, but LARP, but LARP is
no,
basically
LARP is still throwing rules at people. You're right. You're
it's
exactly
still
right.
make believe
Yep.
with rules.
Yep.
And which is great because make believe was my favorite game as a child. And when I say a child, I mean old enough that my best friend and I were probably too old to be playing make believe, but we were still doing it anyway because that was how we liked to tell stories, you know.
Yeah.
But there comes to be a point, and it's you said like 11 or 12. It's actually I think it's about 7 or 8.
Right.
There comes to be there's like a tipping point where they start outgrowing free form make believe, and you can transition them to role playing games pretty easily. But much younger than that, if you're trying to teach them a role playing game, it it's hard for them because they don't understand why you want to add rules to their game. They already have the game. They already know the rules, you know.
Yep.
The rules are I shot you, you're dead. Right. I didn't have to roll dice for that. Now I have to roll dice for that. Why would I do that? Right. So there's sort of this, you know, child development phase that they get past, and it's easy to lose the the playfulness of a role-playing game or of that storytelling tradition if you don't have something to replace make believe with, you know. And it used to be storytelling, you know, that used to be like that was what people did. They, you know, you sit around and tell stories. um Now, among other things, we we play role-playing games, we play video games, we play a bunch of games that have structure and rules, which are still fun. You know, we find them fun in a different way, I think.
Yeah.
So, given that, it seems that most of the time, if we're talking about making role-playing games in this market, we're not going to be aiming at anyone under 8. We're going to be aiming at, you know, tweens or people who have nostalgia, and that then moves you out of the toy market. And I can see why then people wouldn't want to license these things, because it might be like they're not a sure thing. Like if once you're, you know, the toy market, I would imagine to some extent is like, we really want to hit the kids under 12 because they get Christmas presents and birthday presents and Santa Claus.
That I mean, that's not really that is, but it isn't like that. Like we're talking about, I think, very different kinds of toys here.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of toy is currently in, I think, an identity crisis because of the preponderance of video games for kids. You know, and the stuff that we're talking about, like, you know, the classic, you know, your stuffed teddy bears, your action figures, your that kind of thing. Yeah, that is going to be moving towards an older market. But role-playing games for children and for very young children do exist. I don't know that they are that toyetic in a weird way.
Right.
I think that, like, because if you ascribe any specific toy to a young child's role-playing game, you're instantly sort of either getting back into it's sort of and when I'm talking role-playing game, I'm being very specific about like a game that is designed to tell stories, not just about like combat and clearing obstacles, but also about the relationships between the characters that are having these experiences.
Yeah.
Which is something that, you know, is a critical part of role-playing games that other games don't do. You don't care about like how the two people in a war game, like, you know, at the front line of your army feel about each other, but in a D&D party, it really is part of it that like maybe the paladin is catching feelings for the wizard. And so that's another thing that I think is something that comes naturally to younger kids and is an interesting thing. Like, you know, the idea that like, oh, actually these two are best friends, right? And you know, like that sort of expansion of the storytelling beyond just like, we found a monster, we defeated it, we found a trap, we got past it. Because that is, you know, that is a board game or a war game. Role-playing games have this, yeah, it's about the relationships are I think a bigger part than in other games. And obviously I'm painting with a broad brush. That is something that sort of lends itself to an older group. I've seen games like there's one game called No Thank You Evil, which
I was
is
hoping someone had mentioned that.
Yep.
which has, I think, possibly the greatest name of any role-playing game in history. Like I can hear a kid's voice saying it. No, thank you, evil. Like it's so good. And I've seen like a couple of those. And that's, yeah, that I think is more geared towards younger kids. But again, it's very interesting. The mass market role-playing game, the one that you can get at, you know, Walmart, is Dungeons and Dragons. And another thing that I think is fascinating is like I run D&D for kids, like professionally. That's like my day job. And kids a lot younger than you'd think pick up on those rules very quickly, with skills that I think they've honed on video games in a way that, like, you know, I didn't, because I was at an arcade playing like Asteroids, and these kids are like at home playing Fortnite and Roblox and whatever the hell Biggie is.
So we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to talk about that because if there is a market here, both you and Steph have been exploring getting access. Like we've talked about the indie toy market, and obviously RPGs have for a long history of going, we can't afford the license, but we're going to go as close as we possibly can. and I know, Sean, you've talked about this, that you've taken your not quite Transformers RPGs into the toy market, and they're selling very, very well. And Stephanie, have you also been able to access that kind of that area, or is Threadbare not really overlapping that way, or?
I could, but I haven't.
Right.
But overlapping into other markets is actually, it's in Threadbare's DNA. Threadbare came out of a unpublished script for Hand Knit Heroes, which was my comic book for knitters. And I did not sell it at comic book conventions. I sold it at knitting shows. And you want to talk about a group of a very large group of people who show up to these shows with money to spend. Yeah. And like they did, it did very well and in that market because of that. It also did really well in that market because even though it was a comic book and it was okay for a teenager, you know, it wasn't too racy or anything. Knitting shows are not typically attended by little kids. So the people buying it were, you know, their moms or their grandmas or their aunts. Once in a while, their uncles. You know, there are male knitters out there. We love you. But certainly that market is very large, very female, and you know, very willing to check out something new. And I think that that's something that, you know, Sean taking his games to toy shows and toy conventions is brilliant because
Thank you.
You know, the Gen Cons and the Origins are filled with RPGs. You know, the IGDN booth is crowded.
Yeah.
You know, which I love. You know, I'm there. I love that it's crowded. People go there because there's stuff to buy. But if IGDN had a booth at, you know, a toy market or a science fiction convention that isn't, you know, we've done, IGDN's done a couple of comic conventions to test out the markets. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It just really depends.
Yeah, I think it depends on the scheduling and the like what their events are. So one
Programming,
of the things that really helped us at like TFCon is that like TFCon is all about this dealer's hall where you can get these amazing things that you literally cannot get anywhere else. But after that dealer's hall closes, a lot to do. And so having like one room where we're running games is pretty huge. And it's really nice to be a big fish in a little pond as opposed to like one of a billion different role-playing games, like all clamoring for attention.
It's also good to be in the big pond. Just to be
Oh,
clear,
yeah.
I don't want us to not be in the big pond.
Yeah, no, definitely be in the big pond, but
because that's where the bulk of existing customers who are proven that they will buy a role-playing game, right? They are qualified to
be like a
sold
salmon, just go back and forth. You gotta...
Yeah, right. You know, so we want to be in that big pond too. But I think it's a really good point. You know, like being in the small pond is there is value there. And when I was doing Hand Knit Heroes, there was another woman who had started a comic book as well based on knitting. She and I actually started almost the same day. And we started going to these shows and sharing a booth. And when people would come by and they were like, wow, like, this is weird. Aren't you guys competitors? We're like, when there's only two of you, it's not competition. It's a support group.
Yeah.
I love that phrasing.
Right.
That's excellent.
You know, they say, you know, the rising tide lifts all ships and things. And it's true that at a certain point when your pond is really small, you know, you can team up and make it a little bit less lonely there.
Mike,
Absolutely.
in the media, in toy media, do you agree that there's this sort of perhaps an untapped hunger in the toy market that people, if you just took a lot of the people who read your articles and are looking at the new reviews, if you said, hey, there's a game where you can use your toys or play these things, and what, maybe there isn't one yet, but there will be. Is that a massively untapped market?
Yeah, because like toy collectors love the cool new hotness. We love to have the exciting new thing, and just like the role-playing game markets, we always want to try new stuff, new adventures, new systems that we've never tried before. And having a new toy in our hands, that's exciting too. And yeah, I really think there is a huge kind of market there. Like I know Sean was talking about with like third-party Transformers. Us Transformers fans, we are rabid for the next iteration of like, hey, here's our third-party combiner of a figure you only saw in a comic book once or something like that. Looking at you, IDW Prowl Devastator. Stuff like that. Yeah, like it's cool. Like I love it when we can get excited about new stuff. And the fact that bringing a toy to a table to enrich that role-playing game experience. I ran a game at a local convention for Transformers by Renegade Game Studios. When I brought out my Titan Triptychon, that table exploded. Like, by the way, you're fighting this now. Have fun, asshole. And everybody got so excited for that. And if you told me like we were playing like let's say we were playing one of Stephanie's games. If I said, hey, you fight this new nightmarish creature, and if I brought out this hodgepodge monster, people would be like, oh, that's cool. Where did you get that? People would get really excited. I think it adds that new tactile experience. And there's that inner child in us. Like everybody loves the thrill of getting a gift or getting that new fun experience, and just being able to see something that only existed in our imagination moments ago in our hands. That's exciting beyond words. And I think when people realize there's a cool correlation between toys and role-playing games, you're going to see some really amazing stuff. It doesn't have to be bought on on a store shelf somewhere at like a mass market retailer like GameStop or Walmart. There's things out there, like I said, going out to these booths at these conventions. There's cool stuff out there, and I'm really excited to see what can be created from that space.
Yeah. As someone who's attached to the board game industry, I know so many board gamers over the last 5-10 years have bought huge Kickstarters with tons of minis that they don't play with because they can only get the game to the table once a year, and they come with these huge boxes. And I imagine those people, if you went to them and said, hey, grab your Cthulhu figures from the last 10 Cthulhus you backed, start playing, I mean, obviously they know Call of Cthulhu exists, but if there was some other way to sort of go, hey, this is just like the Arkham Horror minis.
Steve, just call me out next time. You can name me. It's fine.
I would also like to play Oops All Cthulhu's. Let's get together for that.
Mine are the Nemesis, so it's all alien and aliens.
Yeah, exactly. Like Nemesis, go and play the Aliens RPG or whatever. Yeah, there seems like a huge untapped market there. That's, I think, the thing that's come out of this panel more than anything is that people are hungry for toys and games about toys and using toys in games. So, we often worry that markets are getting oversaturated. There's no new ideas. There's a huge amount of space here that isn't being explored. So that's really a great message, I think, to designers out there. There's so much that people want and are looking for. We have to wrap this up. What I'll do, guys, is just go around the table and tell us where we can find you. People can follow you, ask you more questions, email, whatever is your preferred platform. We will start with you again, Mike.
Okay, yeah. So if you want to follow me, you can follow my podcast at thisweekingeek.net. You can also follow my professional work, which is writing and activism, at mikeashkewe.com. That's MikeAshkewe.com. I'm also available on all social platforms at Birdman Daughter. I'm usually posting pictures of cats, squirrels, and anything that's four-legged. And I'm always around in some capacity. You can also email me at Mike at thisweekingeek.net. I'd love to chat with you. And by the time this airs, I should be launching a tabletop Patreon. So looking forward to seeing you around on Fox's World of Adventure.
Fantastic. Stephanie.
So you can find Threadbare at threadbarerpg.com. You can also find it on Drive-Thru RPG. It's there. You just search for Threadbare, you'll find it. You can follow me on Mastodon. I'm Mortain at dice.camp. I don't post terribly often. I'm mostly addicted to Facebook, which I have pretty tightly locked down. My blog is mortain.com/blog, and there's a link in there for it's basically a just running regularly updated list of games I've designed or adventures I've contributed to. So if you're looking for like the exhaustive list of things that I've created, it's over there on my blog.
Do you just want to spell Mortain for us?
Mortaine. And that's also my username just about everywhere. You can find me on itch at mortain.itch.io. There's a few games over there. So I just kind of spread the love, I guess.
Fantastic. And Sean.
So if anybody anywhere, I'll even throw this at you guys. Here's this before Gen Con. Please go to Holomatics at Kickstarter.com and throw us a bone. We're doing a big Kickstarter. It's our second big Radical Shadows game. Other than that, Nerdy City, we've got a Patreon where we sort of expand out this universe, and we do like we've obviously got like the big stuff like action figures and stuff like that, but like weird things like we'll include like rules for playing the grown-ups while the kids are off having the adventures. Stuff like that is on the Patreon. And different little towns you can have adventures in. So yeah, nerdycity.com is where everything is, and Holomatics will be pulling for that this month.
All right, fantastic. Best of luck with that Kickstarter. Sean, thank you so much for all being here today. I'll also say I'm Steve D from Tin Star Games. I also have a game about playing kids, which you use toys in. So that's called Afraid of the Dark, and it's on tinstargames.itch.io. So you're all being sent to bed, but the shadows under your bed can actually kill you. So check that out too. On Tin Star Games everywhere. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists. It's been a really interesting, eye-opening panel for me, and I hope everyone out there has enjoyed it. And hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the IGDN Summer Series. Thanks and bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Be excellent to each other.
San Dimas High School football rules.